Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in the world. Talent Finders would like to welcome Dr. Johanna of Flaherty, author, psychologist, and crisis psychologist. So, welcome, Johanna.
Thank you so much. And I'm in Las Vegas. I have no idea where your audience are.
Well, all over the world, a great audience. So, first and foremost, Johanna, I'd like to congratulate you on all your achievements. Can you share with us how your career started?
Oh, it's so interesting. I was born in Ireland and I actually had no career goals whatsoever. I wanted to, grow up, fall in love, get married, and have the two kids with the picket fence. That didn't
Yes.
happen. Through some of my opportunities, I spent some time in Germany and in Switzerland and became quite fluent in German. And then I started flying as a flight attendant for your guest. And that actually, I thought I'd fly for a couple of years. And again, our career was, fly for a couple of years and do the same thing. I had the goal of, the marriage and the children.
Yes.
And I flew in London for Monarch Airlines for a couple of years. And then I came to Pan American and flew for them for quite some time. And I loved flying, loved it. I flew as a
so
flight
amazing.
and as a purser, and then I was training pursers, which is the position, the senior cabin attendant on board the aircraft. And that was amazing because, we were flying 747s.
Yes.
That was a wonderful career. In the whole process of that career, I flew for 16 years. I developed a drinking problem.
Yes.
And I want to give your audience hope. I celebrated 46 years of personal recovery on January the 1st.
Wow,
So
that's amazing. Well done.
it's very much part of my career as a professional psychologist. So I developed this drinking problem and I got into recovery, at a very early age.
Yes.
And then I started helping flight attendants through the union. And then the company decided they would formalize. All the unions had, peer support, essentially. The pilots had their own, the flight attendants had theirs, which I was part of. And then the mechanics and the ground personnel. And the medical department, we had a very robust medical department with like 5 doctors in there and so on. And so they decided they would establish a corporate employee assistance program. So long story, very short. I did not want that job, but I got the job. I got the job as the corporate manager of Pan American's employee assistance program back in 1986. And, it was amazing, amazing. I started the job in 1986 in the medical department. And in 1988, many of your audience that are a little bit older will remember Lockerbie happened. Pan American exploded over Lockerbie.
Yes.
Everybody on board killed. I was assigned to go to London and Lockerbie. And that is what catapulted me into the role of crisis psychology.
Amazing. Wow. So speaking of that, you're obviously highly specialized as an expert in crisis management from a psychological perspective, as well as a renowned expert in trauma and addiction recovery, which you obviously mentioned. What led you or made you pursue such a nuanced speciality? And can you tell us more about this? Or was it that sort of just a natural progression for you?
Well, the nuanced speciality, and I like the way you put that, Karen, is first of all, it's true lived experiences.
Yes.
I live the experience of recovery. And along with recovery, there's a high correlation between trauma, either childhood trauma or indeed incident trauma, airplane crashes, car crashes, and so on, and subsequent addiction, substance abuse.
Yes.
And so that was a lived experience. The other lived experience was Lockerbie. I was baptized along with several other wonderful Pan American employees. We were baptized by fire. We did not have an established, what I would call a human factor response team to take care of the victims' families. So everybody was called out from a different position, sales, and sales, flight attendants, ground personnel. They had no training on how to maintain boundaries and how to protect themselves from secondary vicarious trauma. So again, a lived experience that made me one of the pioneers and advocates for getting these programs up and running in the airlines. And now in the United States, they're mandatory.
That's amazing.
Every airline has to have one.
Yes. So you obviously have such an impressive and highly accomplished career. You were the vice president of the very well-known Betty Ford Center from 2006 to 2013, which was not only a massive responsibility, but also a real career achievement. So can you share with us more about how you achieved this?
Yes, I will be glad to. And I just want to encourage the audience. My, what I would call ascending trajectory for accomplishments was not on a very linear route. I
Yes.
fought, I fought this all tooth and nail. I didn't want any of this, ladies and gentlemen that are listening, but here I am.
Yeah.
I was very familiar with the Betty Ford Center because when I was running EAP programs, which is Employee Assistance Program for different airlines, I used to refer pilots and flight attendants and others to the Betty Ford Center for treatment. But along the same lines, while I was still with the airlines, I was very fortunate. I was able to complete my PhD in clinical psychology. And when I did that, I had always intended, to get more involved with the clients, the patients, and be more in a clinical role. And I was very involved with research and development regarding, this was my own interest regarding the correlation between early childhood trauma and subsequent addiction.
Yes.
So the Betty Ford, of course, were familiar with me and my work, and they hired me first as a consultant to bring that body of work, the correlation between trauma and addiction, into the Betty Ford Center. So I did that, and then, as it so happened, the vice president of the treatment center was resigning, and
Oh,
so
wow.
I was asked to step into that role, and I was really blessed, really blessed. I loved it, and I do believe that I made quite a contribution. I'm still very passionate about that field,
Yeah.
and again, it's all been, I suppose, I don't know. I'm very, intuitive and have a
Yeah.
spiritual journey, and I believe that we are where we're supposed to be. Sometimes
Yes.
we ask, why the hell? But there we are.
Yeah, exactly. I think we all go through those
Yes, yes,
situations.
yes.
So, what would you say then some of your biggest lessons were within your career or have been within your career? And I'm sure there's multiple that stand out, but what is there one that particularly stands out for you?
Well, there is. I'm a reluctant, consummate student. It's really quite hilarious when I sort of try to analyze myself. I'm still studying. I'm in my early
Wow.
70s and I'm still studying, but not writing papers. I'm still studying. I love to study. I'm now
Yes.
taking a course on shamanism. So I'm a consummate student. I want to be as knowledgeable as possible,
Mm.
but also humble, humble, humble. And I've learned over the years that it's very important to seek mentors. So I was very blessed with mentors. But the,
Yes.
the key to mentors is listen to what they're saying.
Yes,
Listen to,
because they have the experience.
yes, and try to learn everything we can from them and keep ourselves in a state of humility. And the humility is key to personal and professional success.
Yeah, absolutely. So that leads me to the pandemic, which really turned our worlds upside down and inside out and amplified so much psychologically, which has really brought mental health to the forefront. My question is, mental health, trauma, and addiction have always been psychological issues and have also always existed, but there seems to be a real stigma attached to the subject. So over the past few years, even more so during the pandemic and post pandemic, what are some of the tools you used for those individuals and yourself and were perhaps helping during that time? And do you think that this problem has become worse or just been amplified, and come to the fore? I know that's a big question, but I think there's multiple kind of levels,
Karen, I
to,
think I think we'll have to sort of move in with the conversation because it's multiple labels and questions. But
yeah.
I wanted to share with you that the COVID pandemic challenged the world and crippled us with fear.
Yes.
Now I want to share with your audience the COVID pandemic was not just theoretical and abstract for me. My sister, who lived in London, died from COVID.
Mm,
So it was very, very, very traumatic and sad.
mm,
This period was uncharted waters for all of us.
yeah.
And my primary focus with my clients was safety first for children and adults.
Mm.
Safety. Are you safe? During your masks and this and that and so on. I also encouraged my clients, my people that I was involved with, my little nucleus of influence, minimize TV exposure.
Oh yeah, the
As
media was terrible.
as there's an emphasis on promoting fear.
Uh-huh. 100%.
So I have an acronym that I use for fear. False evidence appearing real.
Yes,
So there's
absolutely.
free floating fear all over the place. The children, my God, are so scared. I have a wonderful friend who's a pediatrician, and he would say the children are coming in with their mask up to their eyes. I mean, totally scared, totally scared.
Fear
I would also,
mongering.
yeah, fear mongering, absolutely. And I would ask my clients, where did you get this information?
Mm.
I mean, they were going on the internet and there were so many, scammers or whatever you call them on the
Mm.
internet, false information, heightening fear.
Mm.
And I would go on because I would say, where are they getting this information? And I would say, oh my God, such trash and such nonsense.
Mm.
So really had to limit the TV exposure because you know what? If we are constantly seeing, even though it's false information, after a while we begin questioning ourselves and we begin
Mm.
looking at it as if it's truthful. And then
Yeah.
that heightens the fear. So we were crippled by fear. Our world was crippled by fear.
Yeah.
I have been doing, and still going, by the way, I was doing a support group with another doctor friend of mine
Mm.
and a Reiki therapist. We were doing support group for frontline workers,
Mm.
nurses, doctors, X-ray technicians, and all hospital staff. And
Yeah.
even those experienced individuals were so frightened. The other group that I was doing and still doing is a group of flight attendants for Air Canada, and sometimes I would check in with American Airlines
Mm.
because they were still working on a very limited scale,
Mm.
and they were frightened, 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 and rightfully so. Some of their colleagues died. And you are correct. Embedded in your question is mental health and addiction.
Mm.
Mental health and addiction totally escalated, along with actually abuse, spousal abuse,
Mm.
and child abuse.
Yeah.
So every therapist I know, their practice was bursting at the seams. I had to really set very clear boundaries for myself because I was constantly being called, Johanna, can you see this one and can you see that one? I would see whoever I could, but I had to limit because otherwise I would be ineffectual. So
Yeah.
it did escalate. And, Karen, I still don't think that we see the total fallout from.
Oh no, I
uh,
mean it's happening all day, every day, even now, and the damage it's done to children and the impacts it's had in terms of education and engagement and social anxiety. It's just crazy. Like there's just so many elements to it. So yeah.
exactly. As I always said, we were told how to shut down, very clear,
Mm.
shut down, the whole world shut down.
Mm.
But there was very little assistance on how to reintegrate.
Mm.
Even adults that had been locked up for almost 2 years
Yeah.
had really lost some of their innate social
Mm.
skills, and they were nervous and aggressive. And when we're fearful, we can be aggressive.
Mm. I even know from my own experience, like, I was so used to traveling and getting on planes and these types of things. And it was like, I really had to kind of go through my own process of that whole reintegration and, what's the whole check-in process going to be like? And, are they going to let you in? And there was all these, psychological things going on in my own head. So I totally understand, just reintegrating into social, meeting
Norms.
for
Yes.
for dinner or just simple things that we were just used to and accustomed to doing. So I totally understand.
Oh, and I totally understand it too, totally understand it because I traveled very limited, but I did travel during COVID and it was just kind of amazing. So,
Mm.
and also we know now that some of the high school kids, some of them are very reluctant to go back onto campus. They want to do homeschooling, which is not good for them socially,
Mm.
but that's what we're experiencing. So, yes, I think that we did as good as we could. I do, honestly, I must say, that I'm a little disappointed in how the whole COVID situation was managed here in the United States.
Oh,
We have
very
some
bad.
we have some incredible departments, Department of Health, Department of this and Department of that, and we have incredible generals who know how to implement and distribute. And I would
Mm,
watch and I would say, where are the generals? They know how to distribute it.
mm,
Finally, they got their act together.
mm,
And here in Vegas, it was the firefighters and the National Guard that finally set up, mass distribution of vaccination. And
mm.
they set it up brilliantly. That's where I went to get and I have inside tracks, but that's where I went to get my vaccination. So I must put it out there. I was very disappointed with how we handled it.
Yeah. So within your own career, you've also had to deal with some very scary and traumatic crisis situations, obviously pioneering the aviation industry in terms of crisis management, from the Lockerbie disaster to mass shootings, which is very intense. So having such a massive responsibility when dealing with trauma of all these very unique and heartbreaking situations, can you share with us more about this in terms of your own experience or, addressing each of these crises? Because obviously they're
Yes,
all very
yes,
different.
yes. My first major crisis was Lockerbie, and I responded there as I was assigned by the medical director, and wore myself out completely, and
Mm,
came back and got very involved with the Air Transport Association, trying to develop and getting training for the people that are going to volunteer for these positions
mm,
as essentially caregivers for the families. And so it was an amazing experience because when we finally started asking for volunteers, it was amazing the people that volunteers, captains, flight
mm,
attendants, management, and so on. And so then it
mm.
was our responsibility to get the best people in to train them. And
Yes.
I thought, well, first of all, who has experience in training for mass disasters, mass casualties?
Mm,
And somebody told me, I think it was one of our pilots, a lot of our pilots are ex-Air Force, were ex-Air Force. And so they said, well, the military, Johanna, they are the best. And they have a department called the Department of Casualty and Memorial Affairs. Casualty and Memorial Affairs. So I contacted them. They were phenomenal. They invited us to go to the Pentagon to meet with the colonel and so on. Then we invited them to come in and do some training for us,
mm,
and they did. So then, when Pan American folded in 1991, TWA essentially headhunted me, and I went over to TWA and developed their response program from a human factors perspective, and also had the Department of Casualty and Memorial Affairs come in to train the volunteers.
mm,
And of course, Flight 800 happened. That was the flight going to Paris that exploded over Long Island Sound.
mm.
We were far more prepared. We had our team in place, but it was still very challenging, very, very challenging. What
Yeah.
have I learned from the experience? And then, of course, I was in Las Vegas when the shooting happened. What's amazing, and I do believe that the universe really kind of provides in some situations. Prior to the shooting in Las Vegas, I had been contacted by the first responders here, police and fire, to help them with their what they call critical incident stress debriefing program. It's a 2-day program, essentially psychological first aid.
Mm,
So
mm.
I had trained over 200 first responders before the shooting. It was phenomenal in a way because they all were trained to respond to do, with their firefighters and police, psychological first aid.
Mm.
So, you also asked, how do I keep my mental health in check?
Yeah.
I'll weave it back, Karen, to when I started out, you know, trying to remain humble.
Yeah.
I'm doing the best I can with the information, the training that I have, but I'm not alone.
Mm,
I'm not alone. First, I have wonderful people helping, wonderful. And also, I have a support system for myself. I have some friends that I know, psychiatrists and psychologists that have been friends for 20, 20, 30 years, and I'll call them and do my own debriefing.
yeah.
There's also an incredible spiritual component when you are thrown into the aftermath of major disaster, like an
Mm,
aviation disaster where everybody's being killed, the Las Vegas shooting, where we had 58 casualties and fatalities, and indeed the perpetrator.
Mm,
So I worked with the first responders, but I also worked with the last responders. And people always ask me when I do public speaking, who are they? They're the
mm,
coroners
yes.
who do an incredible job. And it was
Mm,
sacred work. And I became very close to the coroners. I had some experience working with them during the Tilbury aftermath. And so I keep humble and keep grounded, which sounds like an oxymoron, but I keep grounded spiritually.
yes.
I have a strong spiritual belief, and I know I'm not alone. And
Yeah,
I get the
absolutely. So that leads me into if you could tell us more about the work you do with chemically dependent women in Calcutta, and how did you become involved in such a different initiative?
That was an amazing experience. I'm actually not involved anymore, but it's back in the early 90s.
Yes.
Uh, a psychologist in New York knew these nuns over in Calcutta, and they were asking her if she could go to Calcutta to help out and so on. She couldn't go, but she knew somebody that would go, and that was me. And I
Wow.
met with the nuns. They were in New York raising funds, and I met with them. And they asked me would I go to Calcutta, and I go, "Yeah, I'll go to Calcutta." Why
Mm.
I said yes, it's another story. But in any event,
Yeah.
so I went to Calcutta, and I work primarily with a group of nuns. They're French based, the
Mm.
Sisters of Cluny, who are very close to Mother Teresa's charities. And they were working with orphans. And here is the situation: they had an orphanage for about 100 girls, essentially, and from babies all the way up to when they age out at 18.
Mm.
And the big problem there was, when they aged out, they're very vulnerable. They're very
Yes.
vulnerable to street drugs and pimps and so on. So I did some work with the nuns, and it was amazing talking about, the dangers of street drugs and so on and how to protect themselves. And so that
Mm.
was, oh my God, that was
Amazing.
an amazing experience. I loved it. The poverty was excruciatingly painful. I'd been to India many, many times, but I'd
Yeah.
been to New Delhi and, Agra and, of course, Mumbai, which was Bombay back then. I've been to
Yes.
those areas many times where there's poverty there. It's nothing like Calcutta.
Yeah.
So my work in Calcutta was a blessing,
Yeah.
a blessing for me.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So you are also the author of a number of books, most recently Weighted Wings. So can you share with us more about your recent book as well as your two previous books? And why did you decide to write the books? And was this something that was organic for you, or did you find the process of writing the books challenging?
Yeah. So the first two books, they're on Amazon. One is an ebook, quite simple, but quite comprehensive. It's called The Correlation Between Trauma and Addiction. That was very easy to write because it was clinically based and a little bit of my lived experience. Then there's another book. It's called Daddy Goes to Meetings. It's for children whose fathers are in recovery. And down the road, I want to write one about Mommy Goes to Meetings or siblings, which are very much sort of ignored. And
Yes.
then back to Life with Weighted Wings. So when I would speak, which I speak very frequently, on the subject matter of healing ancestral trauma, which I absolutely am very passionate about. So, I was always asked by the audience, do you have a book? And I would say, yes, I have two books actually. And I would explain what I had. They weren't interested. They were interested in my memoir. They were interested in my lived experience. And so I started Flight with Weighted Wings, I'm sure about 10 years ago, Karen. It was
Wow.
very difficult to write because it is my story.
Yes.
And so as I would begin writing, I would have a visceral response of some of my own life experience, some of the shame and some of the that I did, things I did, which I was not the greatest ambassador of myself while I was drinking. And that's all in my memoir. I am very transparent because my memoir is one of inspiration and transformation,
Yeah.
and it's been well received. So for your audience, no, it was not easy. It was very, very difficult. So, but it's done and it's out there and it's getting good response from different groups.
So, Joanna, you've had to deal or you've dealt with many individuals and groups of people within corporations, as well as develop programs for companies. There are many psychological complexities, and one of the aspects I would like to touch on is PTSD. is this something that can ultimately go away, or is this something that can be managed carefully by a patient? And is this something you regularly encounter with crisis situations? And what are some of the tools you use to help individuals through this type of trauma?
Well, thank you, Karen. PTSD is rather complicated and complex, but I need to preface this with when a person is suffering from PTSD and has been diagnosed from PTSD, we need to understand this is not a life sentence. Today, we're fortunate, we have many therapeutic modalities, including appropriate medication.
Yes.
In the aftermath of major disasters like aviation crashes or the 9/11, or indeed the shooting here in Vegas, we can see more of acute stress, and it does not necessarily develop into PTSD. There will be some folks that develop PTSD. Absolutely, the individual that is suffering from any form of acute stress or PTSD, I would recommend that they seek out an appropriate therapist, because our podcast cannot really cover the complicated details
Yeah.
of PTSD. And also, the therapist will work with the client on that. Even though we've worked with PTSD, we've taken the power out of the trauma, we can always be triggered and
Yes.
triggered by the memories, or even, the memories, the anniversaries, and so on. Again, with proper mental health, the goal is to neutralize the memories,
Yes.
take the
Yes.
power out of the memories, not remove the memories, but neutralize the memories
Mm.
and provide the client with healthy coping skills.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, like you having dealt with specific people, and I'm obviously not asking you to reference because that's confidential, but are there a few tools that you could mention that kind of are beneficial across dealing with different patients, or is it very specific to each patient?
Well, of course, it's specific to each patient, but there are sort of, universal tools that sort of help.
Yes.
And the VA, the Veterans Association, are very good with dealing with PTSD, obviously, because of the need. And so, one of the things with PTSD is there's a real temptation to isolate.
Mm.
There's also a real temptation to self medicate with substance abuses, either drugs or alcohol. And
Yes.
of course, that's one of the things I would recommend, that, again, if that is a problem in the individual's life, that they seek help for that.
Yes.
Finding a group, there are actually even self-help groups for PTSD if they can't afford a therapist,
Yes.
uh, faith-based support. Uh,
Mm.
Isolation is the worst,
Oh,
because
absolutely. It's terrible.
we begin to continue to ruminate in our minds, and
Mm-hmm.
the wounded mind is trying to heal. A wounded mind can't heal a wounded mind. So
No.
I would try and prevent isolation, find some good friends, and get involved in some group activity.
Yes. So that leads me to the next question. You've also appeared on some of the biggest media networks like CBS, ABC, NBC, just to name a few. So, do you believe that having the exposure through such channels has also helped you within your career? And if so, how?
Well, as you very well know, that majority of media, if it's credible, is indeed worthwhile. Um,
Yes.
and yes, because I had national and international exposure, I am still called on to assist the already in-house individuals to respond to major disasters.
Yes.
And I work very closely with first responders. I still do here in Vegas. I
Mm.
work with police and fire and find that very rewarding. So I believe that credible exposure, always helps. Of course, the
Absolutely.
negative exposure. So to date, I've been fortunate. I have not had any of that. And so, yeah, I do believe that it has helped.
No, that's amazing. So, I want to talk about leadership or the lack of leadership from both a business and global perspective. So, what would you say makes your leadership style different in your career? And what do you believe needs to change the current narrative from a global and a business perspective in terms of leadership?
Oh boy, this is a loaded question. And in today's world, I'm not sure what's going on your side of the Atlantic, but
Yeah. It's
On this,
crazy. It's crazy everywhere, Joanna.
on this side of the Atlantic, it's really concerning.
Yeah, no,
Um,
it's bad.
my
It's
my style of leadership is I'm very collaborative. When I
yes.
worked in organizations as a leader, I looked at myself as a team leader.
Mm,
I was a team. I am not working in a silo.
no.
Effective leadership requires a strong focus on interpersonal and transformational aspects.
Yes.
Leadership, and particularly when we're looking at national leadership,
Mm,
uh, it is so important to have some form of emotional intelligence.
yes.
And unfortunately, I don't see very much of that. So, what is emotional intelligence? The ability to empathize,
Yeah.
understand, and manage emotions
Mm.
effectively. I mean, this is almost a joke when we see some of our politicians.
Oh, it's like a circus.
Having emotional intelligence helps build trust,
Yeah.
it fosters positive relationships, and creates a supportive work environment. And then
Yes.
communication skills. It is very, very interesting. In today's world, we probably have more globally, we have probably more educated people percentage wise than we've ever had on the
Mm,
planet.
yes.
And yet, the paradoxical thing is they're dictating rather than communicating,
Mm-hmm.
which is really ridiculous. I find that it's dictating, and even unfortunately, the journalists are
Oh, the
not
media is the
with
worst.
the
The
media, not
worst.
reporting the news. They're telling us how to interpret it. And I go, oh
Mm.
my God. So, what I
Yeah,
would say,
and driving their own agendas and driving their own narratives or narratives that are being pushed by somebody higher up. I mean, I
yeah,
had this debate yesterday with someone around the whole image around Kate, and I was just like, well, the world has bigger problems, and whether this image was doctored by her or somebody else. We've got, a food crisis, we've got wars going on. In the greater scheme of things, the whole celebrity and royal family thing is really not that big a deal in the greater scheme of what's going on in the actual rest of the world. So
100% Karen. I mean, I asked, like, who cares and how is it going to make a difference? Uh,
exactly.
so for your audience, I am very blessed that I can do some critical thinking. And we all have the ability to do some critical thinking.
Mm,
And so just evaluate where is this information coming from and check the sources. Check
mm,
the sources. Is it
100%.
true? Is it true? It would be wonderful if we had leaders that were
Mm,
inspirational and had a vision to transform and motivate their team members. Now we see division.
yeah.
Uh,
And that's been
sharing
driven through groups, through race, through religion, through sexuality, through all these different entities. And it's really, really dangerous.
Well, remember the old adage, divide and conquer.
100%.
And I am here to say, and I'm speaking to my fellow Americans, we are greater than that, and we are better
Mm,
than that.
mm,
In unity is the strength. We can agree to disagree, but we
mm.
are greater and better than that. Leaders need to be in a position where they're going to empower and help others develop.
Yes.
This is organizationally and nationally, indeed globally.
Yes.
You'll see many leaders that are they're autocrats, dictators. In that actually is embedded insecurity.
Yes.
The autocrats and the dictators from a psychological perspective is major insecurity.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Because if you are aligned in your own person, you are going to be very happy to allow others to grow and develop and
Absolutely.
and have a platform. I often love this the expression, the sun shines on everybody.
Mm.
And so let's allow it. And the other one, well, they're all very important, but how about trust and integrity?
Uh-huh. 100%. But this is actually what I just to elaborate on that point is, do you feel, because obviously like what happened through the pandemic and the fear mongering and the way that the narrative was being pushed. I'm not saying it wasn't a serious situation. I'm just saying that I think that there was a lot of fear, but I think now, due to the fact that that happened, people's consciousness has been raised and people are now starting to see and question, whether it's their governments, their communities, their leaders, and question a lot of things. And in a way, I kind of feel like it's bringing back critical thinking. I mean, it's not fully there because obviously there's still people who are just so brainwashed by certain things. But, I was just curious on that point because I think there's sometimes where you can have conversations behind closed doors, but then if you really stand for something, then you need to stand for it, whether people agree or disagree. But at the end of the day, if you're fighting for something that's going to be for the betterment of humanity, why do people feel so able to talk in behind closed doors, but when it comes to standing up, they just kind of pander back into some kind of narrative because they care what people think, or they, going to lose friends, or it's going to affect their work or whatever. So I'm just curious on your take on that.
Well, I think, Karen, that is an individual that's incongruent. You say one thing behind closed doors and you say something else in public.
Yeah.
I would hope, because of the pandemic, the worldwide pandemic, that we're all a little bit more consciously aware.
Yes.
However, building trust, let's take our own personal relationships. Building trust, and we can take the personal and move it out into the collective. Building trust requires consistency, reliability, and transparency. Now, ask yourself these questions when we're hearing, sort of a global message or national message. Is there consistency? Is there reliability? And is there transparency?
Yeah.
We're all highly intuitive, but we need to check into that. So trusting relationships, people here in the United States are very divided, and they're even afraid to speak. It goes from a discussion very quickly into a heated argument, particularly about politics. So I think trusting relationships, and we could all adhere to this, requires open communication, a positive work environment. It's all right that you think differently than I do. I respect that.
Yeah.
I respect that. But this is my take on it. This is my opinion.
Yeah.
And I think trust and integrity. Now, power can really corrupt if you do not have a Northern Star. And that means you're very grounded in, it seems like an oxymoron, but grounded in your spirituality.
Yeah.
Grounded in your faith, whatever that is, whatever that is. We are all capable of being swayed. And so I think we need to recalibrate every day, every day. And so overall, when I think about leadership in today's environment, it requires a strong interpersonal ability to build relationships.
Yeah.
And I find that it is ironic that pilots and police officers and several others in particular jobs, safety-sensitive jobs, have to have a psychological evaluation. The leaders of our countries, and you talk about safety-sensitive, that is the most safety-sensitive position, they do not have to have a psychological evaluation.
Yeah.
Now, my question is, why? I would highly recommend that.
Yeah.
So, if individuals wanted to embody some of the aspects that we talked about, there's a great possibility for productive work, environment, humanity, and success.
Absolutely. And then that leads me to the final question. What are the 3 key pieces of advice you would give to those looking to pursue a similar career to yours, and how would you like to be remembered?
Well, what I would, encourage the individuals that want to have a career similar to mine, which is kind of unique because it's very diversified. I'm often asked after I do a lot of public speaking, particularly on emergency situations and crisis management. And we need to be willing to suffer, because I can assure you that this work really transforms one. But get relevant education and training, and get a solid foundation in psychology through a formal education. Then I would encourage them to build practical experience, get a mentor. Theory and education are important, but they will never substitute for practical experience.
Yeah.
The field of psychology and crisis management, continues to evolve and change, but there are core staples. And for the individuals that want to come into the field, I would encourage them in reference to their practicum to also look for volunteer opportunities if they wanted to do crisis management with first responders, mental health facilities, or community organizations, and develop a strong interpersonal and communication skills. Psychology and crisis management requires effective, clear, concise communication. Focus on developing the following skills: active listening, which you will learn in your graduate programs, empathy, and non-judgmental attitude. They need to stay current and engaged. And by following these pieces of advice, they can lay a strong foundation for a successful career in psychology and crisis management. Always approach the field with the expression tabula rasa, a clean slate.
Yeah.
Compassion, empathy, and a commitment to making a positive difference in the lives of individuals that are suffering. So, Karen, how would I like to be remembered? I would like to be remembered as somebody that made a difference in alleviating suffering in a small way.
Absolutely. Amazing. Well, thank you for joining us today. So if people would like to connect with you, whether it's to purchase your books or to get in contact with you, what are the best platforms to do so?
Well, my book is available at Barnes & Noble's. My book is, by the way, Flight with Weighted Wings, and it talks a lot about aviation disasters and my work in the aftermath of the Las Vegas shooting.
Yes.
It's available at Barnes & Noble's, as I mentioned, and also Amazon. I'm available by email is the best way to get me. I also have a webpage, of course, and that is johannahelps.org. And my email, which is johbowler@yahoo.com.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. And hopefully we can have you back in the future to see where you are in your continued journey. Thank you so much.
Yeah, that would be lovely. Thank you.